Welcome to the Therapy Show podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Mustard. In each episode, I interview a seasoned and knowledgeable talk therapist from the counseling world to glean valuable insights, techniques, and tools that you can apply to your practice and your life. And if you're considering a career in the counseling field or just want to hear about what it's like to be a talk therapist, then this is the podcast for you. This week, we dive into a conversation that bridges the gap between the need for therapy and the accessibility of mental health resources. My special guest, Liz Kelly, a licensed clinical social worker, shares her journey from a career in fundraising and development to becoming a therapist, driven by a passion for helping individuals navigate the complexities of life, grief, and personal growth. In an era where the demand for mental health services has skyrocketed, Liz brings to the table her innovative solution, a book titled This Book is Cheaper Than Therapy, aimed at those who find themselves on long waiting lists without access to therapy due to geographical constraints or lacking the financial means for traditional therapy. Liz's book emerges as a beacon of hope and guidance. And throughout this episode, Liz delves into the essence of her book, discussing the wide range of topics it covers, from the fundamentals of self-care and the mind-body connection to navigating relationships, establishing healthy boundaries, and finding meaning in life. Liz's approachable and humorous writing style makes the subject of mental health accessible to all, encouraging readers to take proactive steps towards their well-being, even in the absence of therapy. Join us as Liz also shares invaluable advice for therapists and aspiring authors on the process of writing and publishing a book that can make a significant impact on people's lives. So whether you're a mental health professional, someone interested in personal development, or simply looking for ways to manage stress and anxiety, this episode is packed with insights and practical tips that promise to enlighten and inspire. But before we hear from Liz, I am excited to extend a very special offer to you. You can access my collection of guided meditations and hypnosis recordings at no cost. These powerful tools are designed to positively influence your mind and body, promoting profound shifts in your perception, emotions, and overall well-being. By harnessing the power of focused attention and deep relaxation, both meditation and hypnosis can transform your mental and physical states. Currently, my library includes sessions on weight management, achieving success, and alleviating anxiety. And to access these transformative resources, simply click the link in the show notes. I'm in the process of expanding my offerings to include topics like fostering healthy relationships and building confidence. So don't miss out. Click the link in the show notes to start your journey today. Well, hey, friends, welcome back to another episode of The Therapy Show. I'm your host, Lisa Mustard, and this week's guest is Liz Kelly. Welcome to the show, Liz. It is so awesome to have you here.
Thank you for having me and for this opportunity. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Me too. I can't wait to dive into this topic because it's just awesome. You've recently written a book called This Book is Cheaper Than Therapy, and I just was drawn to that name and I had to know more. So can you share with our audience a little bit about who you are, what you do, how you help, and maybe kind of share why you decided to write this book?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a licensed clinical social worker and I live right outside of Washington, D.C. So I work with a lot of really busy professionals and young professionals in the Washington, D.C. area. And during the pandemic, I noticed that there was a demand for services, and it was really tough because as the demand for services was going up, I had less childcare than ever, things were busier than ever, and I just, I felt bad that I wasn't able to fill this need for services as much as I just didn't have the capacity. So I thought, what if I just took most the skills that I teach my clients every day in my practice and I put that in a book that's down to earth, easy to read. I try to insert some humor in there. And so that's where the book really came from, was wanting to provide a resource for folks who wanted to be in therapy, but maybe they were stuck on a waiting list or they don't have access where they live. There's some states in this country where their therapists are few and far between. And a lot of people simply don't have insurance benefits or they don't have the financial resources for therapy. And so I wanted to have a resource for those folks that were interested in mental health, but weren't sure where to start or maybe didn't have the access to it.
I love it. And I just got me thinking about, recent conversations I've had with people. There are a lot of people out there who, um, for whatever reason, they might have health insurance, but they just can't afford to go to therapy because their health insurance doesn't, cover but so much of it, or their income is going to other places because they just have other things going on. It's not that they don't want to go to therapy. It's just sometimes it's one of those things that it's like, unfortunately, the last thing that we will maybe pull our funds from. So I think this is just such a great tool. I love it. And
Right.
I love this book, and I've gotten about, I want to say, you guys, not almost halfway through it because I'm a fast reader, but I love how you break it down into the different topics. So could you share, like, what topics do you cover in the book that would be
Sure.
of interest?
Absolutely. So I cover a pretty wide range of topics, but I try to think about the book sort of has this trajectory where we sort of start with the basics, right? So I start by talking about self-care. And I wrote about in the book how sometimes I don't really like the word self-care because I think it gets misconstrued and people think that it means green smoothies
Yeah.
and really expensive workouts and trips to wineries with your girlfriends and not that self-care maybe can't include some of those things, but really I view self-care as something that's necessary for you to be able to keep on going. It's things that you do to make your future self proud. It's not always fun. It's not always sexy. It's self care can be pretty boring and tedious sometimes. It's
Yeah.
like going to the doctor and flossing your teeth and things like that. So we started out talking about self care, the myths, what it is, what it isn't. And then we move on to the mind body connection. I talk a lot about the nervous system and how we can regulate the nervous system and go from fight, flight, or freeze and back into rest and digest. I talk about relationships. I talk about healthy boundaries because so often our stress is exacerbated by the fact that maybe we have a lack of boundaries, where maybe we're not saying no, or maybe we're blurring our professional and personal lives too much. Or so I spend some time talking about the different types of boundaries, how to identify what boundaries you need, and how to establish those and uphold those. And I talk a lot about grief in the book as well, because oftentimes we're dealing with losses on a lot of different levels, and loss isn't always the death of a person. It could be the loss of a job, a relationship, a loss of safety, a loss of security, a loss of financial resources. And losses can be so many different things. So we talk about loss. I also spend some time in the book talking about how to create more meaning in your life and how to identify your values, because
Mm.
it's one thing to reduce stress, reduce anxiety, be able to regulate your emotions and boost your mood. But it's also important to be able to create meaning, because once you're feeling better, it's helpful to have a why. Like, why are you doing what you're doing, or what motivates you? So there's a section on the book that talks about creating more meaning in your life. And then the final chapter in the book is, despite the book's cheeky title, This Book is Cheaper Than Therapy, I do have an entire chapter on what to do if you're looking for more. How do you identify a therapist that's going to be a good fit? How do you find services if you're broke? I talk about activities that might have sort of a therapeutic effect, even though they might traditionally not be therapeutic treatment. So, such as like improv acting classes or sports or other types of things can feel therapeutic. So that's how the book wraps up, is that if you're looking for more, I point you in the right direction.
Yeah, I love it. And gosh, you bring up so many great ideas and great thoughts. And it sounds like it's just a great framework for someone who, needs to know what are the most important aspects of taking care of your mental health. So maybe right now you're not looking to get into therapy, but you just want to know, like, what is good mental health? And I mean, you just described so much of it right there. What is good mental health? I love that. And so I want to circle back to you becoming a therapist because you didn't think that this was the direction you were going to go in, right?
Right. When I first came to DC, didn't really know. I was a little bit lost. I had studied international studies in college, and I came thinking I would do something in government, and I ended up in fundraising and development, and worked for a while in DC doing that sort of work. But after a while, I realized that I really wanted to work one on one with individuals. And I was really fascinated about how people change and how people face challenges and how they overcome challenges. I was also really interested in how people deal with grief and how people manage loss. And so I did some research and I learned that I could become a therapist, and so I went back to school and decided to pursue this path. And it's been a really good fit ever since.
Yeah, no, it sounds like, I joke around and because my prior career to becoming a therapist was something completely different. But I had a similar experience where I personally went through some of my own stuff and really loved the process of like learning about myself and becoming self-aware and identifying my values. And I realized like I would like to be able to help other people do this as well. And I think that it's such a rewarding field that, and there's so many different things you can do within the field of therapy. What type of approaches do you like to use in therapy? Like, what do you mainly draw from, I guess?
Yeah, oh, that's a great question. So I initially, when I work with clients, I tell them that I'm pretty holistic. I like to know a lot about their, their typical days look like, how's their health, what's their history like, what experiences shape them, what experiences have they been through, what's their use of technology like, what's their work life balance like, do they have time for movement, do they have social outlets, what spiritual outlets do they have. So during the first couple of sessions we do a pretty deep dive, and I really want to get to know them and figure out like, okay, what's going well and what things could we tweak a little bit. So I definitely want to know a lot about my clients lifestyles. I have a background in bereavement counseling, so grief and loss counseling, and so a lot of times I do look at my client situations through the lens of loss. What losses are they contending with right now? For example, I work with a lot of young professionals, and I think a loss that we don't talk about very often is that transition from college or from high school to the working world.
Hmm.
You're in this academic environment that's very rewarding and you get a lot of feedback. And then all of a sudden, you're now in the professional world and it's just not the same. It doesn't feel the same. You don't get the same sort of feedback. And that's a real loss. And so being able to recognize that as a loss and talk about it can be really
Yeah.
helpful. So I often use grief counseling and grief theory in my work. I like to use mindfulness as well because I think oftentimes our stress and anxiety and our difficult emotions come from either being really fixed in previous experiences or being concerned about things that haven't happened yet. So being able to practice the ability to bring ourselves back to the present moment is a really great skill. I also like to talk to my clients a lot about the mind body connection, about what happens to our brains when our nervous system gets activated, and how one key skill for emotional regulation is being able to calm our nervous systems before we start to try to problem solve, right? Because sometimes what happens is we start to problem solve when emotions are running high and we just can't think clearly in that moment. So if we can kind of learn some skills to train ourselves to bring down our emotional reactivity so that we can increase our ability to problem solve. So I work on that a lot with clients.
I want to share with you a fabulous offer from Therapy Notes. Have you ever felt swamped by endless paperwork and tangled schedules? Then step into a world of clarity with Therapy Notes. Hailed as the gold standard in electronic health records, Therapy Notes is your beacon in the dynamic realm of mental health care. With their round the clock 7-day live phone support, it's evident why they shine with a dazzling 4.9 out of 5 stars on trustpilot.com and Google. From effortless billing to streamlined scheduling, precise note taking, and state of the art telehealth, Therapy Notes is your all in one solution. And for the prescribers out there, they're ecstatic to introduce ePrescribe. And if you're switching lanes from another EHR, they've got your back. They will seamlessly migrate your demographic data at zero cost, ensuring you hit the ground running. So become part of the 100,000 plus mental health professionals community who've chosen Therapy Notes. And to embark on a 2-month complimentary journey, just tap the link in the show notes or use promo code Lisa at checkout at therapynotes.com. That's promo code Lisa, Lisa, at checkout at therapynotes.com. So dive into the Therapy Notes experience today and see why it's the talk of the town. Navigate with confidence and choose the best. Oh, cool. So would you say that the issues that your clients come to you with, it sounds like you come from a grief and loss perspective. Do they come with anxiety or depression, or does it run the gamut of your presenting issues, I guess?
Yeah, it really runs the gamut, but I would say I work a lot with anxiety. I work a lot with burnout. I work
Mm,
a lot with stress. A lot of my clients are managing perfectionism and imposter syndrome,
mm.
which isn't a diagnosis, but it's something that a lot of my clients are dealing with. So those are the areas I find myself working with often.
Yeah, yeah, no, I can totally relate to all those. I think that's just I mean, you just
Yeah,
speak of the human experience, like going from high school to college and to your first job and to all the things that, they're just chapters and they're new experiences. And it can be a lot to navigate if for a
right.
lot of people. I totally understand that. I used to work in a college counseling center when I
Oh, that's
first
amazing.
when I first graduated from my program. And man, it's just everything, so many
Right,
different types of issues that came in. A lot of anxiety. This was back in 2006. It's been a while for me since then, but and I know times have changed so much. I mean, I just from working with that population to working with them now. And like you mentioned, technology. I think you mentioned technology, or maybe the use of social media and constantly being, taking in information and just like the mind body connection of all of that and how that plays into the work that we do is it's changed a lot, over just
right. It
handful
really
of years.
has.
And even with COVID, having to then switch to virtual, it's just been wild for a lot of people.
Yeah, there's been so much change in
Hmm.
such a short period of time. And one of the things I talk to my clients a lot, or one of the things I say is that we're having normal reactions to a
Yeah,
very abnormal world. So, there's
right,
nothing but wrong with you. It's just
right.
we're trying to adapt to this world that doesn't always feel safe and
Yeah.
that is changing so quickly.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great
It
way of
really
putting
makes
it.
sense that
Hmm.
we're having the reactions that
Hmm.
we are. And
Yeah,
it's
but
actually pretty amazing we're doing as well as we are, all things considered, right?
right. Yeah. The fact that we we can get it together and yeah, some days, right? Like, oh, I don't know how I do it. But I think that's part of the self-care that you talked about and part of the being aware of burnout. And not just for, therapists, but for just people in general is self-care. And you mentioned self-care not always being pleasant. That's an interesting idea because yeah, often we think like self-care should be getting a massage or getting a
Right,
facial. But I mean, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I work full time, I got a podcast. Like I don't have time to go
right.
let that be my self-care. So
Yeah.
self-care for me sometimes just looks like sitting in my room with the door closed, staring at the wall. Honestly.
Yeah. Sometimes self-care is just I'm gonna breathe for 5 minutes and
Mhm.
I'm going to unload my dishwasher can sometimes
Yeah.
be self-care. And it's yeah, it really depends on the moment. And
Yeah.
you're so right. I think during the pandemic, when I heard the word self-care, I used to get kind of ragey because I would be like, I don't have time for that.
Right.
And because I was thinking, I've had to have a mental shift that like, oh wait, self-care is like sleep. Self-care is like breathing. Self-care is
Hmm.
drinking water during the day. It's what I need to do to survive. It's not always being going on a 45-minute long hike through the
Right.
woods. I mean it could be that, but we a lot of people don't have time for that, like you
Yeah.
mentioned.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't have time for it. They don't have access to it. They don't have
Right,
they just don't have the resources to be able to do that. So I love the conversation around self-care really is just doing things that are good for us, even if we don't always like them.
right, absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
sometimes I think of it as like, what's going to make future Liz happy? And I'm like,
Right.
ooh, future Liz is going to love this. And
Future future Liz is gonna be so happy I did this. Maybe not in the
yeah, future
moment,
Liz is
but
going to be thrilled that I set up the coffee maker the night before.
hmm. I mean, yeah, sometimes it's just the simple little things like that. I mean, like I just took a big sip of water, but it's, oh yeah, I got to drink my water, or I need to go. It's Friday, and 20 years ago, Friday self-care would have been, well, maybe more than 20 years ago, the age I am, but 25 years ago, it would have been go out with my friends and let off some steam. And now it's like, I just hope I can get to bed before 10 o'clock tonight and maybe read my book.
Yeah, exactly. I have a new book. It's like
Yeah.
I'm that's my same plan. I'm like, yes, let's get through bedtime and
Yeah.
read for a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah, I know. I know. So I know we kind of talked about this already, but what type of impact do you hope your book will make on people who read it?
I hope it demystifies therapy, that it makes it more accessible, or it makes the idea of mental health more accessible. I don't use any therapy jargon in the book. I don't use complicated terms to talk about mental health. I use swear words when appropriate. It's everyday conversational language. I just want to make it approachable for individuals, and I wanted to make it slightly humorous so that it's easier to take in this information. I want people to know that if they're not able to go to therapy right now, they're not doomed. There are a lot of things that they can do on their own. Of course, I encourage people, if you have access to therapy, if you can do it, therapy is amazing. Like, I am pro therapy, a huge advocate for therapy. So I want people to keep advocating for themselves and keep trying to access services. But in the meantime, there are still a lot of things. You don't have to put your life on hold until you can get into a therapist's office.
Right.
You can start doing things right now. You can focus on the basics: sleep, hydration, move your body, have social outlets, get outside, balance your use of technology. There's so many different places where we can start to make, to start the ball rolling in a positive way. And I think we talk a lot about like a vicious cycle, how, things, oh, one bad thing happens and then another and another, but you can also start a positive cycle too. So if you
Hmm.
can just kind of figure out one little small change,
Hmm.
that oftentimes leads to something else and something else. And so, I want this book to be the thing that helps gets the ball rolling for people in a positive way.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's great. And so, where can people find your book?
Oh, great question. So, people can find my book wherever they buy books. So,
Okay.
Barnes and Noble, Amazon. My publisher is Bridge City Books, which is an imprint of Pesci Publishing.
Oh, okay, cool.
So, you can find my book wherever you want to buy them. There's also an audio book that's coming out the day that it's released on March 19th, and
Okay.
there will also be an electronic version too.
Okay. Well, I'll put all the links in the show notes for people just to be able to click and go ahead and purchase it. So y'all don't have to worry about remembering that. Just look to the show notes so you can buy the book. I love that it's also an audio because I can imagine this being a really great book to listen to while you're going for a walk or, you're in the car and you just have some time and some me time. So I think that's just great. Okay, cool. And I do want to touch on this a little bit because we do have listeners that are, therapists and they are curious themselves about writing a book. So can you share a little bit about like how you did all that? Like you made the decision to write a book, then what?
Yeah. So the process of writing a book, I've known my entire life that I really wanted to write a book. I just didn't know what I wanted to write about. And so, my whole life I've kind of written things down here and there and written essays, and I've done some clinical content writing. And a couple of years ago, I went to a workshop called How to Get Your Book into Print. And so I learned a lot about how to write a book proposal and how to pitch it. And from there, I wrote a proposal and I shopped it around and found a publisher that was interested. And then it took me about a year to write it. And then it took about another year to do the editing and get the cover together and the promotion and all of those things. So it's a long process, but I've learned a lot and it's been really exciting. I think, my suggestion is that if you want to write a book, the first thing you should consider is, who is your ideal reader? Like, who is this book for? My book, I really envisioned this book for people who are interested in mental health, who are, young adults or college students who are learning about boundaries, want to learn more about stress management and what real self-care is. Or it's for individuals who need a mental health 101. So
Mhm.
that's my ideal reader. And so when you're coming up with your book, you want to think about, who do I picture reading this? And then you want to write to that person. So write to your ideal reader. Another suggestion that I got that I thought was really helpful is that when you're looking for a publisher, is to look on your bookshelf and look at similar books and see, well, who's publishing the book that I want to write? Who's publishing similar books? And you can also look in the acknowledgement section and find out who editors are, and that's usually a good way to get names of individuals too.
Oh, oh, well, those are some sweet tips. Thank you so much. That's awesome.
Of
Those
course.
are like that's like a big shortcut for a lot of people. So thank you for sharing that. Do you have another book in you? Are you already thinking about your next one?
I have a few inklings here and there. I don't have a solid idea just yet, but this process has been so much fun that I would love to do it again now that I know what's coming, right?
Yeah. Yeah, awesome. Okay, well, everybody go out and
Yeah.
get
I'd actually love
Liz's
to
new
write
book.
about in the book I talk about my inner critic, Nelson. So I
Oh,
named my inner critic Nelson. I gave him a name.
mhm.
And
That's awesome.
no offense to anybody out there named Nelson. I just wanted to give my inner critic a name so I could talk back to my inner critic a little bit more easily. And so I think maybe my next book might be about how to tackle the inner critic.
I love that because we all have one
Yes,
and we all have
absolutely.
different names for our inner critic. So I love that yours is named Nelson. That's awesome.
So I can be like, back off, Nelson. I'm doing the
Right.
best I can.
Yeah, Nelson, simmer down, bud.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Liz. Once again, I'll put all the links in the show notes for everybody to check out your book. And hopefully, come March 19th, you will see some sales going on. This book is cheaper than therapy. So thank you, Liz, for being here. This has just been great.
Yeah, it's been so nice talking with you, and thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome. Please note that the therapy show with Lisa Mustard is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and not a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice. Always consult with your therapist, doctor, or physician before implementing any suggestions from the show. The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard is edited and engineered by Chelsea Weaver. If you're looking to start a podcast or ready to take the editing off of your plate, be sure to visit chelseaweaverpodcasting.com. Well, that wraps up another episode of The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard. I know there are hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there, and I'm thankful you've chosen to listen to mine.
Be sure to visit lisamustard.com to access the show notes and discover more fantastic content.
And I'd be grateful if you subscribe to the show. Thank you.